Hello and welcome back to the Manic Miner remake using AGK Basic, brought to you by wonkypix.com. In this tutorial we're going to create the Manic Miner piano title page, and in order to do that we're obviously going to need to use some sprites now. So far we've managed to get away with either creating sprites on the fly or drawing lines on the screen. The sprites are brought to you by Andy Noble, who has a Manic Miner remake that's quite famous, and the graphics I use with his permission and as part of this project. Please remember, do not distribute Andy's graphics or use them in commercial or in App Store without his express permission also. Now, atlases are an old concept, and in AGK we need tools to help us manage large numbers of sprites for a project of this nature. And for this I'm going to use a rather useful texture packer tool called Texture Packer, believe it or not, and it's from Code and Web. The website can be found here at http://www.codeandweb.com/texture packer, and details will be available in the tutorial. And the reason that I use this tool is that it covers a large number of frameworks. So when I'm not programming in AGK, I might be using Cocos, I might be using Sprite kits, I might even use Unity, depending upon the project needs and requirements. But the nice thing about this tool is that it makes your life a lot easier developing games, particularly with the inbuilt support for AppGameKit here. And the concept really is simple. Add all of your sprites, create a sprite sheet, export it into the AGK format that we can use later in the game. Okay, so first things first, we're going to need some sprites. We're going to need some graphics to use. So here's some that Andy prepared earlier, and these will form part of the project. We've got the health bar and the health bar background graphic when Miner Willie loses the air within the cavern. We've got the Manic Miner home, which is very familiar to you, and as you can see there's two blocks that have been cut out, and that's used on the final end screen on level 20. And to patch that in, Andy's provided some filler graphics. We've also got Miner Willie, the star of the game. I'm sure you're familiar, and that's been updated, as you can see. We've also got some additional graphics for notes, and this is for the piano screen itself, and this is where we want to display the piano playing the Blue Danube. Of course, the piano. Now, I have modified Andy's original graphics. The original Manic Miner didn't follow a piano pattern per se, and in this area here there was two sets of C notes that followed on, so C, D, E, C, D, E, and I think originally it was because it was difficult to create the sharps when Matthew Smith created the original game on the ZX Spectrum, but we've corrected that here, and I've corrected those graphics, or I've added those graphics in so that we have a full piano piece. And then finally we have a title bar, which is where we'll display our level name and any messages that we have. And it's all in a nice folder. I've called this Andy Noble, but for demonstration purposes I'm going to create an additional folder called Images, and I'm going to show you the power of Texture Packer and how this can help streamline your projects. All of these graphics will be made available to you under license from Andy, and these will be uploaded once I've created the piano page tutorial to go with this. I've already started up Texture Packer, and it's available for Windows and Mac, so it's not specific, although I'm developing on a Mac right now. And probably just before I go to this, we can go to the downloads section on Code and Web, and you can see it's available for Windows 32, 64-bit, for Linux and Mac OS. So any Linux developers on AGK have full capability to create the graphics, create their atlases and sprite sheets accordingly. Okay, back to texture packer. If I can get my words out. I'm going to select App Game Kit, and I'm going to create my project. And there's two ways we can do this. I'm just going to expand this out. We can either drag and drop sprites onto the canvas. So I could take all of Andy Noble's sprites here, drag and drop, and then we can see we've got the graphics laid out in a rather long and very narrow sprite sheet, which is not what we want. So the first thing we want to do is we want to change the maximum width size here, and we want 1024, and this looks a little bit more manageable. And the maximum height we're going to set to 1024, but it doesn't make any difference at the moment because the graphics are just approximately about 512 by 512, give or take. That's one way of doing it, but of course when you add graphics you have to keep remembering to do this. So I'm going to delete these out for now, and we're going to add a smart folder. And this is a rather neat option in Texture Packer, one that I use and come back to regularly. So where we have images, I'm just going to click open for now, and then we'll see here sprites and images. And here's the clever bit. As you start working on your projects and you start adding graphics, if you create a smart folder, Texture Packer will automatically add those sprites to your project for you. So if we take the Manic Home and the fillers, I'm just going to copy those and paste into the project folder, and then move back to the project, to Texture Packer. You can see it's automatically added those to the sprite sheet. And if I go back, I can do a copy, and I can do a paste. So I've got the various graphics that we spoke about, and there you go. The sprite sheet has been automatically created for you. Now there are a few options that we need to have a look at and set. And I'm going to go through these now because these are rather handy. First things first is the data format in the settings, and we need to specify the data file. Now, to make our lives a lot easier in development, I'm going to set this to the images folder of our AGK project. So if you remember, we've got the media folder, we've got images, and I'm going to call this Manic Miner Sprite, Sprite Sheet space subimages.txt. Now the space sub-images is very important for AGK atlases and sprite sheets. This is the text file that's associated with the PNG. So the portable network graphics of the PNG file must have this name, Manic Miner Sprite Sheet. So I'm just going to copy that, add in the space subimages.txt, and then make sure that appgamekit.txt is selected here. Make sure it's in the images folder and click save. We're going to go to the texture format where we have PNG, and that's fine. I'm happy with that. It will cater for all, or the product will cater for many different formats depending upon the game framework that you're using. But for AGK, PNG for now. Now we specify the texture file. So if you remember, we go to the images folder and we need to make sure that it's called the same name. So I didn't copy it as I should have done, so I'm going to type it in again, Manic Miner Sprite Sheet, like so. And then we look at the image format, make sure that is PNG, and click save. If we go back to the media folder and to images, there isn't anything there. We've got the splash screen that we've covered off in the first set of tutorials, and we've got a 2x2 white block, and there's nothing there at the moment. Pixel format, we can actually save some memory by using 4444 or some of the different formats that AGK supports, but for now I'm not too worried about memory. I'm just going to use the full-blown 8888 file format. Layout, we've already selected width and height here, and constraints, we need to set this to power of 2 or pot, like so. So we set the maximum width, we set the maximum height, and here we go. You can see that we've got a lot of empty space. So this now is 1024 by 512 because we're using that power of 2. So 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256. It's 2 to the power of in terms of the size. Scaling variance, we're not going to use this in this project, but this is another powerful feature of Texture Packer, where if you're deploying to multiple targets, say Android to iPhone to iPad, to tablet to phone, you can specify different scales or scale factors to either enlarge or reduce your sprites automatically, and you can create those variations here. We're not going to cover that off in this tutorial. A multi-pack we're not going to use, but if you've got a lot of sprites in your project, then Texture Packer will split your sprite sheets over many files. Trim mode, AGK doesn't support trimming of sprites, so where you've got dead space around the sprites, other frameworks will allow you to get more textures or more sprites onto a sprite sheet. AGK doesn't support that, so that must be set to none. And reduce border artifacts, that's quite important because some graphics drivers have difficulty when it comes to cutting sprites from a sprite sheet, so we always add this option. We also want to add in advanced, and the reason being is, and you can probably see here if I zoom in, there's a gap that's formed around the sprites here, and again this is to cater for different graphics drivers that may have difficulty in cutting sprites from a sprite sheet when they're close together. So let's make sure there's no bleed or there's some artifacts from other sprites. So the trim mode is none. Extrude, we're not going to use this option, but if we did, the effect is a little odd. As you can see here, the sprites are bleeding out. Can be useful for some effects, but we need to make sure that is 0. Border padding, that is set to 2. I'm going to change this down to 0, so this makes sure that there's no additional padding here. If you find that you're having problems in your project to your export target with bleeding of sprites, then increase the border to a minimum of 2. Keep it on even numbers. Shape padding, again, this adds additional pad around each sprite that you've added to the sheet, and typically we would leave that at 2. Inner padding, we're going to set that to 0. We don't need to change anything here. Common divisor, we're going to leave at 1 and 1. Heuristic mask, we're not going to use as part of this project, but if we did, this is the ability where you have sprites that may have a single colour as a background to help cut them out, and if I click it here you can see the type of effects. It tries to work this out automatically, but for the purpose of this project we're going to leave that as it is. And shape outlines will help you identify where there's some dead space around the sprites or the actual bounding rectangle that's used, but I'm going to switch that off. We do have some other advanced features, and we have max rex and basic, and if you've got the free version of Texture Packer, then basic is the only algorithm that's available, whereas max rectangles works out the best and maximizes the best use of space to place the sprites. Scale mode, we're not going to use that in this tutorial because we're not scaling the sprites here. And these options we're not going to, so make sure these are switched off. In texture, if you have content protection, which is not available in AGK natively unless you implement this yourself, other frameworks will give you the ability to encrypt your sprite data to prevent other people copying it. And again, we're going to leave dots per inch at 72, typical screen size, pre-multiply alpha as off. If you want to see where your sprite is on a sheet, if you've got hundreds of sprites and it's difficult to find, you can click on each one and the program will automatically zoom in and highlight that particular sprite whilst changing the transparency of the remainder. That's always handy. And of course you've got the zoom bar at the bottom to zoom in on your sprites to have a look at where the data is placed. Or if you have a trackpad on a Mac, you can use the zoom or pinch to zoom functionality. You can click fit to fit it onto the screen. And let's see what happens if I change the maximum width to 512. Now, because of the actual art assets themselves are 512 pixels wide, and we've selected the maximum width as 512, it's not currently fitting on the canvas, and the reason being is we've got the border padding switched on. So if I switch the border padding to 0, you can see that we've now got a 512 by 512 sprite sheet. But if we add the padding, then you'll see sprites that go off canvas, ones that couldn't be added because we're out of space or it couldn't find the appropriate room. So if you have this situation, do check your settings to make sure that you've got the maximum width, maximum size, how that's set. You can also set a fixed width and fixed height, for example, like so. And that might be specific to a project that you're working on. But for now, I'm going to leave those as blank. I'm going to return that back to 1024 by 1024. And again, we have a sprite sheet. Finally, you'll want to save your project. So we'll click save. That's the project I was working on. So let's go back to click save. I'm just going to cheat and force it to artwork. So in the artwork folder, I'm going to call this Manic Sprite Sheet. Save this. So we should now see Manic Sprite Sheet.tps texture packer document that was created this evening. And then finally, we're going to click publish. Now that was fairly quick. So what did that do? In the media and in the images folder, we've got Manic Sprite Sheet.png, which has got the sprites that you saw earlier. And it's also created the subimages.txt. And you've got the file name of the sprite, you've got its width, its height, its X, Y, width and height location. And it works its way through and creates this into the AGK specific format. And of course, if you change the file layout, so let's change the border padding back to 0, and then we click publish sprite sheet again, you can see now that we've got a more compact sprite sheet with a 512 by 512 pixel PNG, and subimages have been created again, so you can see we've automatically created these dynamically. And the best thing is that, of course, the more sprites that we keep adding to the project, we can click publish, and it's automatically in our images folder in media. So we've got very little work to do going forward as we enhance the project. So thank you for listening. This concludes the texture packer tutorial. I do recommend checking out Code and Web's website. Have a look at the product. It is a very useful tool to visually see your sprite sheets getting packed, and for your AGK projects. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next tutorial, where we'll put all these graphics together to create the piano loading screen.